Good morning, everyone. We're continuing with our How to Work with People, The Art of Supportive Leadership by Swami Kriyananda. J. Donald Walters is the author. Technically, he used his American name for this one. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to all. Help us to live according to the highest ideals that our hearts can understand. Guide us and bless us that everything we do moves us closer to the light. We are your children. Bless us, guide us, bring us home to thee. Om. Peace. Amen. So we are in chapter 10, which is called Leadership is Support. I think it's what the name is. Giving Support is what it's called. As I was reading this over just before we went on camera, I was realizing, of course, that, the business environment, and Swami wrote this book for the business environment, is very different, of course, than the ashram environment. But the fact of the matter is that true principles bring true results. One of the one of the principles that has always guided Ananda is where there is Dharma, there is victory. Dharma means those actions which expand consciousness. And whenever you're acting in harmony with higher truth, then the ultimate result of that effort will be positive. Not always the short-term result. Many noble people stand by their principles and die for their principles. So if you think that somebody dying for their principles is a bad outcome, then to say that where there's Dharma, there's victory is not always true. But if you feel that the purpose of life is our own development of our consciousness, and that death itself does not even really interrupt that development of consciousness. It just moves you from one place to another, like going from high school to college, or from a college in your own country to a university in a foreign country. There could be a major change of scene, but the trajectory of expanding consciousness remains just the same. Swami wrote this book deliberately without reference to the principles of self-realization, but in my context, even using his book, I'm talking to an audience that's interested in the main event. I was thinking about it when I was starting to pray, because I do these broadcasts every morning, every 4 days a week, and every morning when I start the broadcast, I start with a prayer. And I think my prayers a lot of times sound like each other, even though each time I'm doing it on the spot, because each time I invoke the name of the gurus and consider sort of what do I want to ask, it's always the same request. Guide me and bless me that I, speak loudly into my heart and into my mind so that I'll know what I'm supposed to do, and then give me the strength to do it. Because everything else follows from that. We can have all these ideas and rules and 5-year plans, and I'm going to be here and I'm going to be there. But it all, let me phrase it differently. Our fulfillment in relation to everything that happens is based on the internal harmony that we create by our actions, harmony with our own conscience, harmony with our own values, but much more profoundly, harmony with the divine. And at the present time, the world is not thinking much that way, but it's moving along. again, just before we went on camera, because I'm filming right from my own house, I'm standing in the kitchen, and my housemate Keshava has brought in this big bottle of avocado oil, which is not a product I usually know anything about. And on this avocado oil, there's a picture of an Ethiopian woman, or now I know she's Ethiopian. An African woman is pictured on the bottle, and then it says traceable, avocado oil traceable. And I thought, how do you trace avocado oil? What are they talking about? But what they're talking about, I found from further discussion, is that you know exactly where this came from. And then there's a whole litany of the ethical considerations that are necessary before this company is going to buy the avocados to make avocado oil, to sell wherever they sell it, to bring it into my house. Thousands of miles away, these farmers are following earth-friendly ways of doing things. And then I also find out that there's a scandalous dark path to avocados that involve everything but Dharma. It's just like, so we have two realities going on in the world. One reality is that avocados can be an instrument of oppression and apparently even violence and death and many, many things that one would not support. Something as innocent and as wholesome as an avocado becomes a weapon in this terrible world we live in. And simultaneously, there is shadow and light. And then we have others who are using avocados to help Ethiopian farmers better their lot in a way that also will save our planet. So it's very interesting times that we're living in. Swamiji wrote his book here in the hope, and it has been successful, because this book has been very successful, that ordinary business leaders, or let me just say, not ordinary, but sincere business leaders, organizational leaders in all stratas of society, will recognize that where there is Dharma, there is victory. And that Swami's lifelong experience as the leader of an ashram, as the disciple of a great guru, will actually infiltrate into mainstream society, and where companies will gradually become more and more successful, not by following the we have to get in there and get it for ourselves and my position is more important than yours and all of that, that people are gradually learning because their hearts are waking up. You see bits and snippets of information, but I heard of one man who had some kind of I don't even know what his company was, but I think it's a food company. But he raised all his workers' salary and lowered his. And as a consequence, his business is thriving, because where there is Dharma, there is victory. So even if one feels that one is going slightly against the trend, there are true trends happening in our society. There are always two trends. There is always shadow, and there is always light. That's the nature of the material plane. Right now, it's Dwapara Yuga rising. So the more of us who can learn from Swamiji and try to be the kind of leaders he was, and also try to create cultures. And university cultures is not, I tend to think, because I live in Silicon Valley, I think of these sort of high-powered, fast-moving, money-oriented businesses that are here. I tend to think of the very little that I know about the culture of these many millennial tech workers who are shifting jobs all the time and always sort of looking for the next interesting thing. And even, in the culture here, if you stay too long with one company, people think you don't have any imagination. So you build your resume by moving around a lot. But wherever you are, for however long you are there, you are still building your consciousness. And your consciousness and the magnetism that you develop within yourself, it has multiple implications. One is you can be a benefit to the people around you. you can be content within yourself. Swamiji, there's a lot of talk, and it's valid talk. You need to accept yourself, you need to love yourself, and all of those are true, especially if you have psychological quirks that cause you to be your own enemy. But in that context, Swami made the comment once, the only way to really be at peace with yourself, he said, is to have a clear conscience. It was just such a simple statement. If you are violating your own principles and you know that you're doing that, you can't rationalize yourself into feeling good about it, because you don't. It's the way that we're made. So wherever we are, however brief or long our sojourn, however superficial or intense our commitment, we can have a commitment to right action. Right action for ourselves, right action for the people around us. A friend of mine who was helping develop an Ananda center in the city of Sacramento, and the center itself simply didn't provide enough income to take care of him, to pay the rent and do the work he was doing. So he took a side job doing some kind of simple, I don't think it was quite manual labor, but it was close to it, just helping this man. He was my friend was very competent and overqualified for the work he was doing, but he was just looking to pick up a little money, so it was the right job for him. But his boss was not quite scrupulous, and my friend saw a situation unfolding in which at the very last he was going to be asked to do something that wasn't quite honest. And he was concerned about it and worried about it and thought about it. And when the day came, the boss made the suggestion that my friend anticipated. And my friend just said simply, he smiled and said, "Oh, I can't do that." And that was that. It just went on, and the guy said, "Okay." And then it just went. He didn't lose his job. He didn't create a scene. He just said, I can't do that. And there it moved. And he was willing, just to not be able to pay the rent that month. He was willing to have anything happen because he needed to be at peace with himself. And so what Swami's talking about here, especially, give support, is that the values that matter, that really matter in the end. And these days we've had all these interesting confirmations of what the real important issues are in life by the fact that people have these death and return experiences, which is a factor of rising Dwapara Yuga in a very practical sense, which is that medical techniques have advanced to the point where, as people would simply die and not return, now medicine can kind of hold you in your body for a longer period of time. So that's an objective reason why these things are happening. But the other reason they're happening is because consciousness is rising. And one of the great confusions, delusions of human life is the belief that the death of the physical body is the death of consciousness, which it simply isn't so. Master made this marvelous statement when he said, let's see, how did he put it? He said, if a person believes that consciousness depends on the brain, he said, rather than that consciousness activates the brain, rather than the brain creates consciousness. If a person believes that consciousness emanates from the brain, when the brain begins to die, the person, and I think this is Master's exact words, feels obligated to go unconscious. And this is where meditation really changes your relationship to death, because if you meditate deeply, or even if you meditate shallowly, you begin to understand that there is a level of consciousness that precedes physical manifestation and that exists independently of it. And so therefore the physical body can die, and the meditator, or the one who's had any intuition this way, doesn't feel any necessity to go unconscious because, oh, my brain is dead, but that doesn't mean I'm dead. I'm still here, and that's what all these death and return experiences are telling us about. When the person goes unconscious, what Master says, what that means is they will go to the astral world, but as Master put it, that such a person never quite wakes up in the astral world because he doesn't have a belief system that allows him to be aware unless he's aware through his physical senses. Master described it as such a person will rest in the astral world, but it'll be a kind of a gray dream, is how Master put it, where you're just kind of vaguely aware, but not profoundly aware, and not until that jiva, that individual soul, reincarnates in a physical body, when they have physical senses again, then they know what they are, where they are, and they begin to activate. I mean, such people are not yet on the path of self-realization. They are on the path of self-realization because everybody has to move forward according to what their own next step is. We're all strung out, climbing up the same mountain, but we're strung out in a long, confusing, in all directions line. And so where you're standing, you have a next step, but somebody who's behind you or to the side or above you, the place they put their foot is going to be a different place than where you put your foot. So what is Dharma for one person may not be Dharma for the other person. That's why the better definition than merely right action is that action which expands your consciousness. And expanding consciousness, depending on where you are, when you think of something opening, it doesn't go from closed to finished. It opens. And it goes through all the stages that are required for it to open. So the premise of what Swami is also writing in this book is that everybody who's working for you, working with you, is on the same journey that you're on. And we're well, as they say it charmingly, we're walking each other home. And so our responsibility, the karmic reason that we're brought into whatever situation we're in, whether we're a leader, whether we're subordinate, whether we're working in a hospital or a high-tech company or a retail shop or doing manual labor, whatever it is, we're brought into that circumstance, not for the circumstance itself, but because it's the next step for us to learn what it is that we're trying to learn. And this is where I was saying a moment ago, these death and return experiences, this world is hypnotic. In India, they call it Maya, and Maya is a sorcerer. She intoxicates us with this illusion that the purpose of this world is the obvious one we see with our senses. I want more of this, I want more of that, I want to have, I want to get, I want to be respected, my ego needs to be protected, all of these different things. That's Maya telling us that this is what will make you happy. And on the other side of it, you have the superconscious call of the divine saying, no, extricate yourself from that illusion. Go inward. Discover where true happiness comes from. And that's what this is all about. Where does true happiness come from? Does it come from playing the Mayic game and winning the Mayic story? There was a phrase, and I think it's still around, he who dies with the most toys wins. Meaning if you've acquired and gotten the most, then you've won the game of life. But it's really exactly the opposite. The more we've buried ourselves in physical things, that the moment you walk out of this body, you don't take any of it with you. And I know that's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. And so when people now have these experiences where they completely separate from their physical bodies, go well into the astral journey, and then because their karma is really not finished, they get thrown back into that body, invariably, well, much of the time, I will say, those who remember, they all come back, and they come back saying it's just the purpose is extremely different than we think it is. It's how much did you love? What did you do for others? And many people write, and you can easily find them. I don't have to tell you where the stories are. They all write that they were putting their energy into the wrong side of the equation. So Swamiji's giving us a leadership method, a way of understanding what we're doing, which is based on the fact that we're all here to learn. And we're all here to learn how to be better and finer examples of ourselves, which includes doing good work. That the necessity for excellence is inherent in all of this. And this is a very important point to understand, because the effort toward excellence is the discipline that allows us to face and overcome our inner limitations. Because the obstacles to excellence always activate whatever limitations of consciousness we have within us. And if we don't strive for excellence, we're actually not striving for self-development. Even though the external excellence is only a means to an end, it is the means to an end. Because laziness, fear, self-protectiveness, anxiety, psychological complexes, you can just make a big list. But facing and overcoming each of those, it's like when you watch a sports team play. I'm not much of a sports person, and so just watching these people kicking the balls back and forth, chasing them from end to end. A friend of mine was a soccer player, a woman. She was a very good soccer player. She went on to be a collegiate coach, and she coached women's sports, women's soccer. And she said she did it for a few years, and then she was finally just sitting there. And she realized if she just watched those people run from end to end kicking that ball for one more day, she was just going to die of boredom. It just was like, enough already. I just can't stand it. And then she went off and started a whole other career. So when I look at it, that's sort of how it looks to me. But I know it's fun. You chase it back and forth, and it's lots of fun. And it demands this tremendous energy of you. Well, all of life is really like that. We're building a big company. We're becoming excellent at whatever we do. We write books. We travel. We do all these different things. It's just a game with a certain set of rules. And it does develop us to become really excellent at that game. But it's because it develops us. So when we're in any kind of a leadership position where we have the opportunity to help people advance, that's what our job is. We're here to help. And everybody learns in a different way and in a different cycle. So Swami writes here, and then just to touch into the book just at the very end here, it is often wise, moreover, to encourage people to follow their own projects as long as the broader aims of the institution are served, or at least not injured. He says, suppose, for example, you have an idea that you want carried out, but the person you have in mind for it has some other idea. Suppose even you don't consider his idea as good as your own. In fact, to put a cap on it, suppose you know his idea won't even work. If he is eager to try it, and if you think the broader work can handle what you see as a temporary detour, it may be a good idea to let him go ahead with his plans. There's always the possibility, however unlikely it may at first appear, of his proving to have been right after all. But anyway, at least he'll have learned in the process. Helping others to develop their own understanding is often more important than making a sale or winning a contract or scoring a victory. Don't be afraid of allowing your subordinates to make mistakes. It is only by trial and error that certain lessons can ever be learned. One prominent industrialist attributed his own considerable success to a willingness to allow his subordinates to make their own mistakes and to learn by them. Now that is that's how Swami has run Ananda through the years. It's always so interesting when I and others have found ourselves kind of in a pickle. And you look back and you see the places where Swami tried to suggest that maybe this wasn't such a great idea, or sort of talk to you as far as you were willing to listen in the moment to describe the pitfalls. But if you weren't willing to see them, he stood with you and said, okay, go forward like this. In fact, I know he corrected me, and I've seen him correct others on this very same point. If somebody brings you an idea that you know won't work, but they think will work, he said it completely undermines their capacity to grow when you just say, no, that's not going to work, and here's why it's not going to work. It's like you have to be able to sort of feel what a person is trying to accomplish and how much they can understand. I certainly, looking back at my own life, and if we're honest about our experience, I think we'll all see this. It's people can tell you 10 times that something is really the way it is, but only when you actually touch into it and sort of have it in your own hands, then all of a sudden, oh, I recognize, I hear, suddenly you hear in a very different way what everyone else was telling you. Now, it's a very fine line, because if you're folding your arms and sitting there and waiting to prove that you were right and they are going to crash and burn, that it doesn't take you where you're trying to go. Where you're trying to go with people is to have them, let them know, that you're walking with them. And when the problems you may have foreseen begin to develop, it's a very fine art to say, well, how are we going to deal with this? Okay, now that this has worked out, now what is our solution from here? Instead of saying, yeah, I told you so. I mean, you can see it's 100 times different. I've mentioned in the context of this course, this experience that I witnessed. This wasn't my own, but I watched it. This man who was living at Ananda, who was a very dedicated member, became enamored of this project that took him. At that time, Ananda Village was our primary community. There weren't a lot of other communities to go to. And it took him at a distance, and he got involved in this project, and he worked on it, and he kept trying to make it a success, and he was sure it was going to succeed. And Swamiji kept in very close touch with him because he was geographically not that far away. And every time they would meet, almost every time I was present, just because of the context, and Swami would start a conversation with him, and the conversation would be, are you still committed to doing this? But it never sounded like that. It wasn't just like, are you still going to keep doing this? It was just more like, how are things going? What are you thinking? Just feeling it out. And when it was clear that the man was still committed to what he was trying to do, Swami would start helping him think how to do it, and gave him suggestions and gave his energy to it, visited, tried to make it successful, just let the whole thing play itself out. And finally, and after, it took 10 years, but after 10 years, when Swami started that conversation again about how committed are you, the man said, I've been thinking of just dropping this. It doesn't seem to be working. I've been thinking of dropping this and just moving back to Ananda Village. Swami's only response was, oh, I think that would be lovely. Just like that. But that man never moved in that way again. And as Swami actually put it later, he said he was in a rebellious mood. He needed sort of independence. He needed freedom for a while. So Swami just played out the fish line, so to speak. Just let it play, but kept his supportive energy always there. Just let the man learn what he had to learn. He did, and he probably could never have learned it in any other way. And as a result, the real objective of our relationships with one another, no matter what the context, the real objective, which is to live by Dharma, expand our consciousness, grow clearer and closer to the divine self that we're supposed to be, was profoundly fulfilled. God bless you, my friends.